This one is dealing with the hedonic set point. It says, how do you get this hedonic point back down?
I get what they're talking about. So this is essentially what we're talking about with the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. The limbic system in these cycles begins to desensitize because its job is to keep us alive. And so if I'm constantly having to put forth this massive amount of effort just to get my body to go through the cycles of sleep, we wouldn't be able to survive. The limbic system works on a subconscious level. In fact, 90% of all our brain's processing happens on that subconscious level in the primal area of the limbic system. So these things do become very almost desensitized, and that's actually not an unhealthy thing as long as they're healthy behaviors. If I become desensitized to the fact that I brush my teeth 3 times a day, that's a healthy way to be desensitized. And it kind of goes to this. This is an example. If I'm living in one location and I all of a sudden move, I might find myself taking a turn back to my old house because my brain has become so desensitized in those patterns. So the brain is very, very cyclical, pattern-based. We call these homeostasis. Some homeostatic patterns can be functional. Some can be very dysfunctional. So as our brain gets desensitized to addictive behaviors, essentially what that's talking about is it's creating neural pathways that shut down the prefrontal cortex, which then in turn are hurting our chemical structure. So let me further explain this. And I'm going to call these the 4 main building block chemicals: dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, and oxytocin. Dopamine, pleasure; adrenaline, excitement; serotonin, well-being and balance; oxytocin, connection and love and relationships. What happens is when we participate in certain addictive behaviors, and pornography, for example, creates a flood of all 4 of those chemicals. What happens in our brain is these chemical packets explode, releasing millions of neuroreceptors throughout our brains. These neuroreceptors float in the brain and dock on so these neurochemicals dock on the receptor, which creates a feeling state. So what heroin does, for example, is if I take heroin, it's flooding my brain with the pleasure chemical dopamine. All these dopamine neurochemicals are docking on receptors, and because there's so many, they actually damage the neural makeup of the brain. These receptors, by millions and millions, and the neurochemicals by millions and millions, are using and healing and using and healing. The brain is so plastic. We, as the scientific community is just dumbfounded with what they're realizing the power of the brain is. So as you go through this process of using a drug, what eventually happens is you have to take way more heroin to the point where the brain can't even produce enough neuroreceptors because you've broken them down so much. And this causes brain atrophy. It actually breaks down the matter of the brain. It becomes desensitized. Like you're talking about, this hedonic scale gets to a place of being desensitized, and what happens is our ability to produce enough chemicals to be happy isn't taking place. In fact, when you don't use, your body goes into a shutdown mode with heroin, to where some people have to be hospitalized just to be detoxed because it's so hard on their body to go through that withdrawal stage. Now, the thing with pornography is you're producing dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, and oxytocin. It's messing with all those receptors, and so people often talk about their pornographic experiences as very depressing. They'll have this initial heightened excitement phase, generally a masturbatory phase, and then they go into the state of kind of depression. It's kind of like the chemicals are trying to regenerate, but it's just utter emotional chaos. And some of the research that's coming out shows that some sexual behaviors actually can also atrophize the brain or do what drugs do. So, and we hopefully will put some of those up on our site. Dr. Donald Hilton actually has referenced a few of these studies on how pornography addiction can even participate in brain atrophy as well. So understanding the sensitization versus desensitization, I would claim sensitization is the painful process of recovery where we're beginning to reconnect the prefrontal cortex with the limbic system and be able to say, that's enough of what my brain really needs. Because the limbic system is saying, no, it's not. You need that same amount that the drug or the pornography produced. That's not true. That's not what the brain needs. That's what the brain wants based off of a neurochemical cycle of addiction that it has gotten into. So when you stop that cycle and begin to heal that cycle the other way, it creates pain, or what we call withdrawal. Some pornography addicts say it's almost like they feel sick, they feel confused, they feel depressed. Well, when you heal, it's painful. If you were to get a massive burn on your arm, for example, say this whole part of my arm got third-degree burns, they're going to put a bandage on it, maybe even have to do skin grafts, and then it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt while it's healing. And if I go and I itch that pain, if I relapse, it's going to take more and more and more time to heal. So what we encourage addicts to do is to kind of come to the grips with the fact that it's going to be a painful process. And what's funny is when we can become aware in our prefrontal cortex that, oh, I'm hurting, I'm craving. That's what craving is. It's called the pain of withdrawal. I'm craving. That's awesome, because I'm healing. When you're craving, you're healing. The minute you give in to the addiction, you've scratched the burn, and your brain's still trying to heal, and it's still trying to heal. So being able to get that desire and say to yourself, you know what? I am going to lean into this pain. A therapist can't make you do that. I mean, I don't have that much power as a therapist. I have parents sometimes call and say, how come our son's still using? And I'm like, man, I wish I had that much power. Kind of stinks, huh? But I've had clients who just can't get on top of it. They'll go a year, 2 years. They'll be like, man, I've been in therapy. What's not working? But they continue to do prefrontal sensitization techniques like meditating, doing things that engage our prefrontal cortex, using awareness and mindfulness techniques. And then after a while, it'll start clicking for them, because even though it's taking longer for their brain to heal, it still can heal. And they eventually get to that place where they start racking up a week, then a month, and then they're like, you know what? I'm here. I'm staying here. And they'll go through that 3-month process, and then they'll get triggered, and they'll be like, you know what? I'm not going back there. That was a miserable place, and I'm staying here in sobriety. And it's very possible to go through that healing process. I hope that helped. Kind of a roundabout answer, long answer.